Ladies and gentlemen, in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing the recent Hot Chips conference where Microsoft appeared and they were discussing the Xbox One, and most specifically, of course, the specifications that were baked into their chip and their console as a whole. Now, this is going to be a bit of an itsy-bitsy video. I say that because there is a massive amount of information that is currently out, but apparently not all of it has been released yet, and indeed a couple of really big sites are saying, stay tuned, more is coming. Furthermore, on top of that, there is still a lot of analysis that needs to be done, and there are still some figures that are, well, open to some interpretation, let's put it that way. So there are still a lot of questions. Now, a lot of people asked me to put this video out, so I'm probably going to do it today, and I'm going to wait a couple of days for the dust to settle, more information to come out, and I'm going to clarify some stuff. And hopefully you guys will Facebook me, that's facebook.com/redgamingtech, and we can discuss some more stuff, and I can figure out what parts I need to really elaborate on. So there are still areas that we're not exactly 100% sure of. One of them is we're not exactly certain about how much power, for example, the chip is going to use. We're not even sure yet about what the clock speed is of the AMD Jaguar, the CPU core. What we do know, however, is that, of course, the main system has 500 GB of storage, 8 GB of DDR3, and 47 MB of on-die storage that could be used as cache memory. John Seller, who is a hardware architect at Microsoft, was giving some speeches. I'm going to read you out a series of quotes because they're quite entertaining and informative. I'm going to start out with, almost every aspect has been customized regarding the system, and we've made some alterations to the CPU cluster to support coherent bandwidth between the clusters and other processors. Now, we're going to discuss a lot of this coherent bandwidth in a moment because it's an absolute massive topic. So we'll go into that in just a moment, okay? Now, apparently, in regards to the DX11.1 GPU, Microsoft have actually called the engine 1 Plus. And apparently, these have been customized to significantly reduce the amount of time, the amount of work that the GPU has to spend when assembling games commands. And also very much of note, considering that PlayStation architect Mark Cerny has pointed out how low-level API can be used on the PS4, of course. He also said, we can let developers have access to direct programming on GPU without a lot of overhead. Furthermore, an important aspect of that is letting the GPU and CPU share memory spaces. And apparently, this data transfer rate could be 30 GB per second. However, we will go into that in just a moment because it's a pretty big topic. Now, there's a hell of a lot of other information that has been unveiled. Now, accordingly, the graphics section of the main processor has 15 special processors inside it, and they can handle things such as graphics and physics. Now, let's talk about the ESRAM because it's a pretty big cause of debate, and we'll go into the humor in just a moment because obviously that's the coherent memory system. So, the ESRAM, they're claiming it to be 204 GB per second, and that's 32 MB of on-die storage. That's what they're calling it, which is the ESRAM. Now, they do say it's peak bandwidth. However, from previous analysis and from leaks and stuff from developers, what it seems to be is when it's handling transparencies and so on. In other words, it's kind of like a made-up number. Originally, Microsoft were putting this out to be about 102. And then they realized, well, this isn't actually the case. Basically, originally they didn't realize the hardware itself was capable of reading and writing simultaneously. Previously, they thought it had to be one or the other. And so now they realize, well, this isn't the case. And so when you got alpha transparency blending operations, it's most likely going to be a hell of a lot better. In other words, with alpha transparency, you're going to get much higher performance, but it's not real performance. Real world performance, it's unknown. It could be half that, whatever. A lot of this stuff really depends on what they're trying to use it for at that particular time. Now, let's talk about the audio offload processor. This was actually custom designed by Microsoft, and apparently uses about 1 CPU core worth of processing. Now, as an aside, I've been Googling around on just how much of a big deal this is. Now, you guys may remember that the Xbox 360 is a tri-core processor and has 2 threads per core. However, from what I understand, one of those threads could often be used strictly for audio processing. In other words, developers were actually saying that audio on the Xbox 360 actually hit it pretty hard. And in some cases, it could be 1 to 2 threads that were actually just dedicated purely on high definition audio. So, with processing power, especially considering that the AMD Jaguars are going to be what is considered to be, well, low power devices. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're not crap. They give good performance for the wattage that's being used, but, well, they're still low power devices. It's still a real shame that Microsoft aren't just saying, well, the clock speed of the Jaguar is. We do assume it's going to be 1.6 gigahertz. That's most likely the speed of the PlayStation 4 as well. But I suppose right now it's really up in the air. I'm hoping it's going to be higher, but I'm expecting it to be 1.6, which... But you've also got to remember that 1 to 2 cores, most likely 2 at the start, as far as what we understand, are being allocated towards system reserve. That's exactly the same as the PlayStation 4, so no change there. Now, the real curiosity is the 8 GB of flash memory. I've done some Googling, and right now, as of the recording, there's not that much information available on it. I don't really know exactly what's going around here. Now, if I had to guess, and this is a pure guess, based on the fact that I don't have that much information, it could either be for the operating system, or it could also be for the fact that, of course, the system can resume. Now, I'm guessing it's for operating system and for some resume functionality. In other words, let's say you're on Hibernate or you've got your game paused in the background just to make things faster and snappier. So it could likely be that. Just for your FYI, we're not exactly sure of what the transfer rate of the flash memory is either. Are you starting to sense a pattern here? Because I am. This really was kind of a PR stunt in some ways. I don't expect Microsoft to give us every single detail. I do not expect them to give us in-die shots. I don't expect them to give us all information. But this is a kind of one of those situations where we've got information, but context is everything. They haven't given us some of the information we really need, such as, say, the clock speed of the CPU, just for example. However, the flash memory, from what we understand, is rated between 52 megabytes to 200 megabytes per second. That's kind of a gulf, that's kind of a huge gap, but there you have it. Now, once again, that's not 100% confirmed. It's not been confirmed, I'm sorry, by Microsoft for having one of those days where I just simply cannot speak. Sorry, guys. But that's what it seems to be right now. Okay, so let's talk for a moment about HSA and humor and everything else, that every one of those acronyms that are just driving everyone crazy. So heterogeneous unified memory access was a really big thing. You may remember that the story began when AMD accidentally did a whoopsie and a PR guy was talking in regards to the PlayStation 4. And he basically said, well, the PS4 is going to ruffle stomp the Xbox One in one regard, in that it doesn't actually have humor, whereas the PS4 does. A couple of days later, after I'd reported it, of course, an Xbox One developer decided to respond, and they said that, well, this actually sounds a lot like the information that we've got regarding the Xbox One, and he said, according to the design notes and papers, well, actually, by gosh, it does have a caching system. Right as soon as he said that, I created the video, and I got some pressure actually to take it back somewhat, because some people were exploding. There was a huge debate that said, well, this isn't actually the case. It does. not have humor, and other people were saying yes, it does have humor, and it was kind of like one of those situations where you just couldn't win because there was such a lack of information regarding it. However, at the time, it's worth noting that the AMD Jaguar as a whole does support some level of humor baked in. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to stand my ground for a couple of weeks and see what happens. Lo and behold, information pops up, as I kind of expected it would. And so, what's the stance of it? Well, still not exactly 100% clear, actually. Now, we do know that the DDR3 memory, of course, which is the main system memory in the console, we know that runs at 68 gigabytes per second. Microsoft had already previously confirmed that, but they've reiterated it, and we know that that's using 2133 MHz RAM, and we know that's on a 256-bit bus. So what it appears to be is 30 gigabytes per second of this is coherent memory. The rest, not so much. Because in one of the slides it says DRAM access CPU cache coherent 30 gigabytes per second, and then just underneath that it's got, and I quote, DRAM access non-CPU coherent 68 gigabytes per second, including the coherent transfer. So just to reiterate, it says 30 gigabytes per second coherent and 68 including the coherent, which is non-coherent. So in other words, it's like saying, well, the total memory bandwidth, if you include the coherent and non-coherent data, is 68 gigabytes per second. However, just the coherent part of this is 30 gigabytes per second. I'm really hoping that that's bloody clear because, well, yeah, it's kind of confusing to say, so hopefully you understood that. It's kind of weird because there is so much information right now that's up for debate. For example, one of the big ones, one of the really strange pieces of news from all of this regarding ESRAM, for example, is the 32 megabytes of ESRAM. Microsoft are actually representing it as a series of 4 8 megabyte caches. And bandwidth as a minimum is 109 gigabytes per second. It used to be 102, but obviously with the clock speed increase and blah blah blah, it's a little bit faster now. It's basically really unclear right now if they've got 4 8 megabytes blocks, or if it's one contiguous block of 32 megabytes of memory. It's unknown. There's slides available, but once again, I'm reiterating here that this stuff is incomplete. Microsoft have released some of it, but not all of it, and so it's kind of like a guessing game at the moment. If you also, the really weird thing is, in their slides, it shows that the CPU does have a connection to the ESRAM, that at least the CPU can actually snoop the contents of the ESRAM, but it's still unknown how true that actually is. And it's also a big question because if it is indeed broken into 4 8 megabyte chunks, which it appears to be in the slides, and appears and are two different things entirely, then why is it being used for GPU data cache? That's a bit odd, and I don't really understand that, and not many people seem to really have really good answers for that right now. Now, there are 15 non-CPU processing blocks on the APU, the SoC. Now, from what we understand, 2 are for audio, 1 is what is known as other. We're not exactly sure what other means. It's possibly related to some input-output/connect type of a situation. And lastly, and of course, you know, they're not the very important one really, the 12 for the GPU, because obviously they're not really important. So the ESRAM is a huge mystery at the moment. I don't have the information on me. I can only assume that more information will be available in the next couple of days. That's what I'm saying. This information is really, really odd at the moment. So what about the compute stuff? Well, the Xbox One has 2 ACEs, also known as asynchronous compute engines. Just for reference, the PlayStation 4 actually has 8. We also have a series of specifications of the Xbox One. We know that it's going to handle 1.31 teraflops of computing power, 40.9 G-texels, 13.6 gigapixels, I'm sorry, 68 gigabytes per second of DDR3 RAM, 109 gigabytes per second ESRAM. Those are the peak for the DDR3 and minimum for the ESRAM. The PlayStation 4, on the other hand, gives you 1.840 flops, which is about 40%. I'm going to round these up. 57.6 G-texels compared to the 40.9. That's not a bad increase at all. And then finally, you're looking at 25.6 G-pix rather than the 13.6. Now, there are a couple of theories regarding humor right now and the coherent memory bandwidth. Now, the CPU/GPU tasks, the basic premise, of course, is that the memory doesn't have to be read and wrote multiple different times. So, for example, if the GPU wants to work on a piece of data, it doesn't need to write it into its specific memory allocation, and then once it's finished writing it, it needs to put it to the CPU. The CPU needs to write it to its specific part of memory, blah blah blah. I'm sure many of you know it by now. If not, you can check out the humor video, which I believe is currently featured on the channel. So let's assume 30 out of 68 gigabytes of DDR3 is being used, which, okay, that's a given. The problem, of course, is that that's significantly less memory bandwidth. And if so, that means you only got about 30 gigabytes per second of bandwidth that's capable of this for compute and GPU tasks, which sounds a little bit low in my personal opinion. Oh, and on top of this, by the way, according to Microsoft, 10% of the GPU is allocated towards system functionality. We're not exactly sure what, possibly Snap or something similar, but yeah, that's quite a significant amount less, by the way. So what it appears to be is basically the ESRAM is GPU only. It's a GPU only scratchpad, dedicated address space. It also appears that the Xbox One must flush the entire GPU cache. We know that Microsoft have a fine-grained mechanism to bypass the level 1 cache lines, and this is known as volatile tag. I've actually done a video on that previously. This is from an interview of Mark Cerny, and he pointed out that basically the premise is to make a level 1 cache and so on a lot better. So the Xbox One definitely is going to be behind the PlayStation 4 in terms of compute, mostly because of, obviously, you've got the extra command queues which have been lined up, 64 I believe, and of course the Xbox One also has only 2 ACE processors. This is compared to 8 of the PlayStation 4. That combined with the volatile tag, it appears that the purpose behind this is you're going to get a much better emphasis of GPU on the PlayStation 4. The Xbox One and PlayStation 4, from what we understand, the GPU can, if it wants to achieve the best bandwidth possible, bypass the CPU's caches. However, it can choose to do this or not. However, it can actually probe the CPU's level 2 caches, which is known as cache coherency. Interesting note, by the way, the audio processor was actually originally there to offload the data from Kinect, the audio processing for Kinect. Obviously, I'm sure many of you are aware, but Kinect is a really integral part of the Xbox One, and of course voice from there is also a very integral part. And basically they said to themselves, well, we have a bunch of extra transistors, we can throw this around, so what do you want them to do? So what are my initial thoughts and opinions on this? Because we've been going around in some circles for a while now. Well, here's the thing. Information is still sketchy. Not all of the information is currently available. Some of the information on the slides is down to interpretation. We still, don't have clock speeds for certain things. The way the ESRAM interacts with a lot of the parts of the systems are still unknown. There is even some debate and arguments on regarding the DDR3 and the coherency of the memory. It's a question of right now. These slides are great. They are great for, well, what they're great for? They're great for debate. They give us an insight that we didn't have. We realized that the Xbox One actually does have quite a lot of stuff inside it. But right now, it does seem that the PlayStation 4 is definitely ahead of the Xbox One. Specifically regarding compute, we've gone into that quite a bit today. Nothing's really seemed to have changed much. The extra ACE engines are definitely going to be quite a big thing in the future. I suppose it really depends. A lot of people are going to cite, of course, the cloud for the PlayStation, for the Xbox One. They're going to say, well, you know what, the cloud computing. I've got some problems with that, as I've spoken about in my recent cloud videos. I have some issues with the cloud. It has some really great potential, mostly in terms of the fact that you can offload some processing data on it, but the fact of the matter is you need an internet connection for A. For B, well, how many games are really going to support it? And for C, well, you've got the latency issue, which is not really easy to solve. So the PlayStation 4, it being in there, it's going to be a really big thing. It's basically just right there that developers can easily access it. I'm also somewhat concerned about the Xbox One in terms of how easy it's going to be to program for. Some developers are letting slip that the PlayStation 4 is easier. That's not really a surprise to me. I would be shocked, honestly, if it turns out that the Xbox One is easier to program for. A lot of people are already arguing about how much better the graphics are really going to be. They're saying, well, it's only 40% better, 50% if you include the discrepancy, well, the fact that some of it's system preserved, and that's still up in the air as well, because here's the thing. If you look at the GPU of the Xbox 360, it's nowhere near 50% weaker than the PlayStation 3's, but the PS3 definitely does look worse on quite a lot of multi-platform games, and it really uses the SPUs of the cell to even be somewhat competitive, actually. I think the fact that the PlayStation 4 also supports this volatile bit, as they call it, is going to really work well. I'll read out a very small section of this quote. You can then selectively mark all accesses by compute as volatile, and when it's time for them to compute to read from the system memory, it can invalidate selectively the lines it uses in the level 2. When it comes time to write back the results, it can write back selectively the lines it uses. This innovation allows compute to use GPU level 2 cache and perform the required operations without significantly impacting graphics operations going on at the same time. In other words, it radically reduces the overhead of running compute and graphics together on the GPU, end quote. And you may remember that this was actually one of the things that many people were really concerned about. We were saying, well, the 1.84 T-flops, if he's going to start utilizing those for pretty graphics and physics, what's going to happen? And of course, with the Xbox One, so the PlayStation 4, they do have quite a lot of ways to better cue this in and to minimize the interactions, or what should I say, minimize the impact of the performance. One of my thoughts, because people have been asking me to do this analysis, I would say that my opinions on the Xbox One haven't changed. I think that it's going to be a great console. I have no real concerns about that. I am somewhat impressed, actually, with the amount of data, with just the bloody size of the chip. I think the move engines are going to be a huge benefit as well. From what we're reading, it's good that there are low-level access to the GPU. I'm really pleased about that. It will definitely help to make up for some of the disparity between the GPUs of the two devices. CPU-wise, it's going to be a pretty tight race. I think it's going to be the GPU side of things. It's also pretty obvious that a lot of this stuff is also going to come down to their own libraries. Now, one way the Xbox One could make up for some of this is because it's using DX11. So let's assume that you're a developer and you've just made a PC version of a game, it doesn't matter what game, and you want to port that over to the consoles because, you know, you want to increase your audience. If you're more familiar with DX11, then you could possibly make it a bit easier for the Xbox One crowd. However, you've got to remember that the APIs for the PlayStation 4 are also very similar to DX11 as well. There are some changes, of course, but still. And so it's really strange at the moment. It's a strange state of affairs. We've got a lot of information about the Xbox One, but we're still missing some parts. It appears that there is some level of coherency regarding the memory. However, it doesn't seem to be exactly humor. It seems to be some coherent caching, which is good, but it's not quite how the Xbox One developer initially said it. But at least it does have some caching there, which originally it didn't even appear to have any. The GPU is still significantly behind that of the PlayStation 4. We're not really surprised there. The audio is pretty awesome. I'm glad about that. Compute is going to be behind the PS4, from what we can tell. And so there are still a lot of questions. We don't really know what the flash memory is for. I've tried Googling around. There's no information. At least at the time I'm recording it on the sites that I'm looking at, and I'm looking at the normal ones and trying to dig a bit deeper. There's just no information. There's not really information regarding the ESRAM. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to say, well, we're going to have to figure this out. I'm going to create another video in the next X. I say X because I want more information on it. And then I'll create another video and I'll be able to do much better analysis. Sorry guys, but it's just a simple case that some of the specifications haven't been unveiled yet. It's frustrating for me because I really want to just put some of the stuff to bed. But I don't want to give you guys definites because it's just not fair to you for me to say, well, this is what it is. Because none of the answers right now make 100% sense, which tells me that we're either not being told everything, which is most likely, or, you know, they've done a crap job with the system, which is very unlikely. So what it most likely is that something's operating in a way that we've either not thought about, or most likely there is some stuff going on that we're still not exactly sure about in the background. And some of that stuff, of course, is probably under NDAs, unfortunately. So until we get that information, it's going to be really a pain in the ass. Anyway, regardless, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. It's been a bit of an itsy-bitsy one. I can only apologise. I will see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.